Good afternoon, guys. If you are watching this in fourth block, it should be afternoon. Um, I hope you guys are having a great day so far. I apologize for not being there, but I know you guys will do awesome. Okay. I'm having you all do this ed puzzle because this unit is going to be a lot of cause and effect. And understanding again. I mean, all of history is understanding how events are connected, but with imperialism, you really need to understand this because this is a time where the United States starts to emerge as a global superpower. Okay. Really, we don't reach that peak until about 40, 50 years after this with World War II. But 1898, which you'll see why next week, why 1898 was such a pivotal year for the United States, is where the United States really started to gain some power. So, United States imperialism. So all of you should have a copy of the Intro to American Imperialism notes, and you will fill this out, okay, and answer the question. Fill out the notes, and then answer the questions that pop up in this ed puzzle. So imperialism, what is it? You guys should have talked about this last year a little bit in World Civ, and if you look at this picture, this tells you all you need to know about imperialism. Which, what do you notice about this picture on the title slide? And if you look at this picture, what you notice is you have the American flag, and it's starting, America's wrapping itself around the world. And that is what we are going to look at, is how the United States was starting to expand its influence, not just in North and South America, but all the way around the globe. Okay? And now we have to understand and we have to talk about the ideas that led up to imperialism and that were still prevalent during imperialism, and that is manifest destiny. Now, I said that, and some of y'all were like, you had this weird, like, deja vu, like, whirlwind moment back to eighth grade social studies. You've probably heard this before, because this is usually discussed when talking about the American settlement and expansion toward the West, which this picture right here, if we had class, was going to be your bell ringer. So this is going to count as your bell ringer for today. But look at this picture, okay? Really take some time. Pause the video if you have to. But tell me some of the things that you notice about this picture, because it's about to pop up and you're going to have to type what you notice about this picture. Okay, there's a lot of things going on in this picture, right? Over here in the far right side, you see a city, okay, with boats coming in, very industrialized looking. And then you have railroads, which are moving, from east to west, okay, moving to the west. And notice, what is this angel, this lady dropping alongside the railroad tracks? And that is telegraph, right? So we have the civilization in the east, but we're expanding to the west. Okay. Now notice you have these people who are farming. You have some people who are miners, might be going to California. Okay. And so the United States is moving west. Okay, across this picture. Now notice there are two sides of this picture, right? There's a sharp contrast of this picture. It almost looks like somebody took an Instagram filter to it or something. Okay. This far right side is like very light. Okay. It's very bright, excuse me. And then this side is very dark. So there's a lot of different meanings that you could take from this, right? Some may say, this represents civilization and this represents the uncivilized areas. Or you could also say this is showing you the positives of, westward expansion, moving west, and civilization. And this is showing the negatives as you look on the far dark side of this picture. Natives are being forced out as well as the buffalo and other wildlife. Okay? So manifest destiny is what is being shown in this picture. And ultimately, it was about the United States expanding west. So here's what the idea of manifest destiny is. It has two parts, okay? Number one, it's the idea that God has given the United States the right to expand, okay? That is who has given us this power to do that, is God, okay? So, that's any time in history saying that, oh, God gave me the power to do this, that's usually a pretty powerful argument. I mean, look at back in European days, with the monarchs and kings, the divine power of kings went back to, oh, God has given me this power. But manifest destiny is, okay, God has given the United States the right to expand west. But it's also the idea that another part that encompasses this idea is that the United States is not going to reach its full potential unless we expand. Okay? Which, first off, what does potential mean? Like our potential. What are we talking about? Potential means like what we could be, right? Our future. Okay, that's our potential. And manifest destiny was like, okay, God's given us the right to expand, to do this. And if we don't do this, we're not going to be as great a country as we could have been if we had. Okay. Now, notice this map. Okay. So, first off, on your notes, this is not, it says not on slides. This little lime, neon green, whatever you want to call it, unorganized territory is the remains of a significant purchase that the United States made from France in 1803. What territory is this? It nearly doubled the size of the country of the United States at the time in 1803 whenever we purchased it from France. What land transaction purchase are we talking about? We're talking about the Louisiana Purchase. So on your note where it says not on slides, in 1803, the United States purchased, in the blank, you'd put Louisiana Territory from France. This nearly doubled the size of the country. So leader of France at the time in 1803 was Napoleon. He was tired of being involved in North America. He just gave us this massive territory, and this became parts of many states eventually. I forget the exact number, but it's like 13 to 15, something like that. But anyway, the other land that we received, if you look, okay, from the 1840s was a bustling decade for the United States. You look, we get Texas, we add Texas to the United States. Texas had fought a war of independence against Mexico, won it, and then the United States adds Texas to the United States in 1845. Mexico is still kind of salty about that because they don't think Texas ever won their independence in the first place, and now we're making Texas our territory. We go to war with Mexico, and this shows you everything right here. Okay, we received all of this land as a result of the Mexican-American War, our war with Mexico from 1846 to 1848. So, U.S. expands westward with manifest destiny. So after the Mexican-American War, the United States gained land that would become Texas and several other states in the American West, like California. Which right after this, especially this kicked Mexico when they were down. So Mexico had just lost this war, but to add insult to injury, what was discovered in California? What natural resource was discovered in California? Pretty much right after 1848. Gold. Okay. Now, many did not acquire a tremendous amount of wealth from gold when they moved west to California, but this is what led to a significant number of people moving to California. So before we talk about the United States expanding around the world with imperialism, we had to have the basis of the background of how the United States had expanded before. So we're going to talk about Alaska and Hawaii. Next class, we're going to talk about Hawaii. Today, I want to talk about Alaska. Okay? So, before the 1890s, the United States was kind of in its own little bubble. Okay? We weren't really looking to get involved in the rest of the world. Especially after the Mexican-American War, we had all this new land. Man, we were just chilling like a villain. We were totally content to expand west across North America. But there starts to become this idea by several high up in the government that the United States can really start to compete as an as a world power. We have industrial might, we have a surplus of natural resource, we have all this land. And one man that really envisioned this was Secretary of State William Seward. He had this idea that the United States could become an empire, that we could have a ton of influence around the world. In 1867, in fact, Seward, who again at one point was Lincoln's Secretary of State, decided he was serving under a different president at this point. He led the United States purchase of Alaska. which is where my mouse is pointing now. Now think about it. He was ridiculed or mocked for this. Why do you think he was ridiculed or mocked for this purchase of Alaska? Why do you think many people thought that this was a poor purchase at the time? Well, first off, Alaska is not connected to the rest of the United States, right? You have to, even today, you have to drive through Canada to get to Alaska, okay? Which Seward had initially had interest in this territory on the Canadian coast. He wanted to buy this from the British, this area known as British Columbia, but all he could get was Alaska from the Russians. So first off, it's not even attached to the rest of the United States. But second of all, think about the climate in Alaska. Okay, not a ton of great farmland up in Alaska. It's very far north. Okay, very isolated. So many people thought it was a mistake. They called it Seward's Folly or Seward's Icebox. But as we know, Alaska actually proved to be a very, very valuable purchase for the United States. It got the Russians out of our business in North America, which would prove to be great during the Cold War. But B, we discovered some great natural resources in Alaska. Which first off, sorry, I went too fast. But this picture right here, look at this. This is how people felt about Seward, in the purchase of Alaska. This man is trying to get the polar bear to go and vote, implying that the only thing that's up in Alaska is polar bears. And it's called Russian America because, again, we got it from the Russians. But anyway, we discovered something very valuable in Alaska, and it was the same thing that lured people to California, and that was gold. Okay? That was gold. Okay? Right here, and this is on your notes, we still have a decent amount of gold in Alaska today. About 3.5% of the world's gold is here, and those minerals and rocks make up about, I think it's 12 to 15% of the Alaskan economy. Okay? But gold is what initially started to lure people into Alaska, which right here, this was known as the Klondike Gold Rush. And you see all these people are headed up to try to, secure their fortune. And so there's this factor at play, these people moving up here for this. But the real winners of the gold rush were not the miners themselves, but who could have potentially made a profit. So you have all these people moving up to Alaska to mine, try to find their gold. Who could make a lot of money off of those miners? It's the shopkeepers, right? People who moved north to sell the supplies to the miners. So this leads to there being a significant amount of people to move into Alaska. Not a huge amount, right? I mean, Alaska doesn't have a ton of population today, but this is that initial magnet that attracted people there. Now, gold is something Alaska is known for, but the other thing is black gold. Okay? Oil. And if you look at this, oil and natural gas accounts for 84% of the Alaskan economy as of February 2012. So that number may have shifted just slightly. But Prudhoe Bay, that's where a lot of oil that the United States produces comes from. If it doesn't come from Texas or parts of the Gulf, odds are it probably came from Prudhoe Bay. Because look at this. As of this past summer, Alaska is producing 408,000 barrels of oil per day. Okay? So, again, this purchase that everybody thought whenever the United States bought bought Alaska from Russia in 1867, everybody thought this was a terrible mistake, ended up working out insanely well for the United States. Okay, so we do purchase Alaska, and we have the land from the Mexican-American War, the California and Texas, places like that. But overall, the United States in the 1800s, and most of the 1800s, and we'll skip through that real quick. I keep ruining my segues, I'm sorry. Usually I have my slides in front of me like I'm in class. But this is kind of cool about Alaska real quick. That here is the northernmost high school in the United States. This is located right on the Arctic Ocean, and it's a football field for the barrel whalers, and occasionally a polar bear will come up and chill by the football field. So, y'all thought it was cold at the Trigg Caldwell game a few days ago. No, we don't got polar bears coming up. All right. So, the United States, if you look at your notes, adopted the policy of isolationism for most of its existence. And this is the man who envisioned that, George Washington. Okay? Which, first off, what do you think isolationism means? What does it mean if something is isolated? What does that mean? Okay, isolated means something's like by itself, right? Like in basketball, if you go ISO, you're trying to get somebody by themselves so that they can score. Isolationism means the United States was wanting us, or excuse me, was staying out of all international affairs. We were focusing on problems within the United States, like a great big civil war during the 1800s, kind of biggie, kind of had to deal with that first. And we're not getting involved in international affairs. We're just minding our own business. And this is the main foreign policy of the United States until the late 1800s when we started to imperialize. We are and expand around the world. We're so focused on us. We just want to, focus on America first, and that's it. Which George Washington really, from the earliest days of the United States, thought this was the best course of action. And we hold this policy for 100 years. We really try to stay on our own little space. Which, think about it. Think about the geography of the United States in related to the world. Why is the United States in a good position geographically to adopt this policy where we don't intermingle in international affairs? Just take a guess on that one. See if you know. Well, think about it. What's on either side of the United States? Oceans. Atlantic Ocean on the east, Pacific Ocean on the west. Okay, so we have separation. We have buffers, so to speak, between both Europe and Asia. So we have that distance. So if we want to try to adopt this policy, it's going to be pretty easy to do that because, yes, we have some countries in our hemisphere, but we're not like Europe or Asia or Africa where you have a lot of countries really packed together. We have some space over here. And we have those oceans on either side, so that makes a big difference. So we're largely isolationist, but then we start to think about imperialism. Because at this time, countries all around the world are imperializing, and the United States does not want to fall behind. The British have colonies in India and Australia. Germany has several colonies in Africa. The Spanish have colonies around the world, okay? So why have colonies, okay? So why imperialism? Okay, there's an economic motive for imperialism, which we're talking about like businesses and trade and stuff like that. So think about industrialization real quick, what we talked about with industrialization. Why would acquiring more land, okay, why would that potentially be helpful to big time factories with industrialization? Well, think about it. Land equals resources. You take over these areas, you have more natural resources to make finished products, but also you have more markets. If you gain control over an area, okay, like in the United States case, like the Philippines out in the Pacific, or like Cuba and Puerto Rico in the Caribbean, you also have more markets. You have more places to sell your goods. Okay, so there's an economic motive to imperialism to gain control over areas to fuel economic desires. Okay, make money. Money, it always drives things. Okay, military. So, the United States is trying to build up its navy during this time. There's this belief that you have to have a strong navy in order to be any type of military power. Okay, why might the United States seek to gain control over these various islands in the Caribbean and the Pacific? Why do they need these islands if the desire is to build up a strong navy, have these boats patrolling around the world? Well, it's this. We had built up our navy and we wanted to get it patrolling around the world, but we needed outposts. We needed bases in the Pacific Ocean for these coal fueling stations for our ships. Because if you look at a map of the world, between California and Asia, there ain't a lot. Okay, I mean, there's Hawaii and there's Midway Island. There's a few islands. I mean, there's Australia to the far southwest of everything. Okay, but I mean, it's mainly open ocean between North America and Asia. So we needed these islands, right? And even in this hemisphere, in the Atlantic Ocean, the Caribbean, we needed islands to fuel our ships. Okay, so the military factor was a big significant factor as well. That was another motive for imperialism. Okay, or why imperialism? Global politics. Okay, which on your notes it says political. I apologize. So, um, under political, right, global, like thinking about this in terms of the world. So, again, like I told you, most of the countries around the world are imperializing during this time. The British, the French, the Germans, okay, all these different places. So why might the United States feel the urge to also imperialize? I mean, it's just competition, right? The United States does not want to fall behind. We want to compete. It's kind of like, it pains me to talk about Kentucky football right now, but here we are. It's kind of like, Kentucky, let's say Louisville's about to, or Tennessee, one of our rivals, about to have a top 25 recruiting class. We're not going to be like, okay, good for them. I'm so glad that they got all the top players in the nation. No, what Kentucky's going to do is they're going to try to go out and get their own best players, right? Because they want to compete. Same deal with the United States. We want our country to compete with these European powers. So we're going to go out and try to assert our own control over the world. Okay, so it's the global politics of this as well. Next up, ideological. Okay. Now, on your test here in a few weeks, I'm going to ask you about all these ideas. Because at the end of the day, at this point, American society is a little bit arrogant. We do think our culture is superior. Okay, we're on that verge of becoming potentially a world power. But again, we believe in manifest destiny. Except now we're not just talking about settling the American West. We're talking about expanding our influence everywhere around the world. Okay, but we also believe in social Darwinism. Okay, social Darwinism, which reflect back to our last, the progressive movement. What does social Darwinism mean? Social Darwinism means that you have to have conflict and competition for, society to advance. It's survival of the fittest, and the strong are going to eventually take over and win. And basically, we use that idea to justify the United States willing into places like, I don't know, the Philippines, and taking over and asserting our control over those regions. It's just, sorry, that's social Darwinism, baby. That's just the way it works. We're the strong, and we came and took over. And lastly, the white man's burden, which is basically like the idea that it was our job, it was our burden. We had a burden, something we had to do. We had to civilize the uncivilized people of the world. Okay, so we had the right to intervene in these countries because it was our job to civilize them, to teach them modern ways. Okay, so we're going to talk about that a lot more over the coming weeks. All right. President McKinley's inaugural address, we are on the back now, and I do not want to take up too much more of your time. Okay. First off, before we get to this, on your sheet it says, think about which of these do you think was the primary motive for the U.S. to imperialize and expand? We were going to have a discussion about this in class, but I'm just going to roll it out to you guys this way. You can talk about it amongst yourselves later if you want to. But out of these four, what do you think was the primary motive for the United States to expand? What was the biggest factor for imperializing? Okay. So answer that. I'm curious to see what you said out of these four that we've talked about. Okay. Now, our last thing, we're going to look at President McKinley's inaugural address. Okay. And McKinley's going to end up being a little bit of a hypocrite here. Which, first off, just like I would ask you in class, what does it mean if we say somebody or something, somebody's being hypocritical or somebody's a hypocrite? What does that mean? And simply, it means they say one thing, but they do another. So what do I mean by that? Well, let's look at what he says. Which, first off, what is an inaugural address? If we're talking about the president, what is an inaugural address? Because we look at several in this class. An inaugural address is the speech that a president gives whenever they take the oath of office, okay? Whenever they are inaugurated and become the president of the United States. So this is like the first speech he ever gives, okay? And here's what he says. We have cherished the policy of non-interference with the affairs of foreign governments. Okay. What is he saying? Just focus on this first part, this line. We have cherished the policy of non interference with the affairs of foreign governments. So, what is he saying about governments outside the United States? Like, have we gotten involved with them? No, we haven't. Non interference. Okay. Kind of like football, pass interference. It's, when they get in the way of a pass. We are not interfering. We have let them be. We have cherished this policy. We have loved this policy. This has worked out very well for us. Because what's that idea? See if you remember. The idea that we're going to stay on our own little space. We're not going to get involved in foreign affairs. What's that idea of we're not going to get involved with foreign affairs? George Washington came up with it. We said it earlier in the video. What's that idea? Isolationism. Okay. And then McKinley, yada, 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 keeping ourselves free from entanglement. Basically, we don't want to get mixed up with these other countries. And then he says, we're content to leave undisturbed with them the settlement of their own domestic concerns. Basically, we're not going to stick our nose in other countries' business, other people's business. We're going to let them deal with their own problems. Anytime you see the word domestic, okay, like you hear people talk about domestic issues within a country, we've heard that a lot. In the election cycle, you hear about foreign policy and then domestic issues. Domestic, we're talking about issues in country. So what we're saying is like, we're content, we're happy, leave them undisturbed, and let them settle their own problems in the country. So we're not really, according to this, we're not going to get involved. Things are going to change. But anyway, our diplomacy, which is how we interact with other countries, should seek nothing more and accept nothing less than is due us. We want no wars of conquest. We must avoid the temptation of territorial aggression. Okay? Now, based on this, what does his attitude seem to be about imperialism? Answer that. Based on this quote right here, what seems to be his attitude about imperialism and going around the world and expanding? He is definitely against it, right? He says, we want no wars of conquest or taking over. We don't want to go over and take, a control of people in other lands. And then we need to avoid the quote unquote temptation of territorial aggression or going around being land hungry and gaining land around the world. Basically imperialism. He said we must avoid that. That is what McKinley is saying. Now, what he did, entirely different. Because, again, in his inaugural address, he said that the United States would be neutral. We wouldn't really look to imperialize. And then, under his presidency, we ended up getting Hawaii, Cuba, Puerto Rico, the Philippines, and it's not on the list, but also Guam. Okay? So, we gained all this new land under his presidency in a very short time period. Why? Because of a little something called the Spanish-American War that we will spend some time next week discussing. Are there any questions that you have? Well, I hope this video has been helpful. Again, this pretty much was meant to simulate what class would have been like today as far as what we would have talked about. Again, if you need anything, let me know, and have a great rest of your day.